As our Ang Lee season comes to a close tonight, we look at The Life of Pi, his 2012 adaptation of Yann Martel's novel, which would earn him his second Oscar for Best Director, as here he tells the tale of Pi Patel, a young boy who finds himself stranded on a lifeboat with several animals to accompany. But is there more to this tale than there seems? A visually arresting film certainly, but is there any depth below the flashy visuals? We certainly will find out tonight. I'm Elwood.
I'm Kim.
And you're listening to Movies and Tea. Let's take it to the booth. Welcome to the final episode of Movies and Tea. Here we are wrapping up season 4. And tonight we are obviously looking at Life of Pi, which, while it's perhaps not the last film in the Ang Lee filmography, it's certainly what we've chosen to bring our season to a close with. And I think it's a rather fitting point to which to stop off with Ang Lee, because certainly after this point it's a sort of downward spiral really for Lee's work, with the likes of Taking Woodstock and Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, both receiving critical maulings and not perhaps living up to the expectations that have been placed upon them. Meanwhile, his more recent efforts, such as Gemini Man, have seen him move towards more blockbuster fare and away from the art house scene that we've seen him come up with the films that we've obviously covered over the course of this season. But as I said, tonight we're talking about Life of Pi, his second Oscar win for Best Director, and a film which saw him not only creating a film which was both critically and commercially successful, but at the same time a film which saw him receive the much ire from the special effects community for not perhaps giving them the much due credit that they deserve for this film. So Kim, I mean, here we are, the last film of our Ang Lee season, and how did you feel about Life is Pi? Or Life of Pi? Life is Pi?
Yeah, Life of Pi is... I mean, I think I was more excited to watch it when it first came out, and as the years kind of went by, I kind of had less and less interest in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was because it was more dramatic, and I've been slowly moving away from, watching drama movies. Or it's the fact that I've always been wanting to read the book before I got to the movie, and the book's still kind of sitting on my shelf unread. And then I just kind of forgot about it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I think that I wanted to watch this for the wrong reasons. I just love things with tigers, so I really wanted to watch the movie for the tiger. Yeah, so, all kind of weird reasons to watch this movie. And finally watching it, I think it's... I don't know how to say this. It's not a bad movie, obviously. There are a lot of things that are really good about it, like visually, and all the kind of fantastical elements that slowly come up as the movie starts moving more into that kind of more fantastical element. And just how everything is shot and how, everything, like the cinematography of this is incredible. But, I mean, the main point of this was that, he would tell this story to this writer and convince him, that this is a story that at the end of it, that he'll believe in God. So I believe it's more of a story about maybe faith and beliefs. Does it deliver as well as that? Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Maybe through this discussion we have, maybe I'll feel a little bit more certain on whether the goal of the movie in the beginning was achieved throughout.
For myself, I mean, I remember the book coming out and it being insanely popular. It was one of those books that everyone was sort of coming in to buy, and it was sort of I just do not get the appeal of this book at all. So I can't say I was overly thrilled when the film came out, and certainly it's a film that I've saw more times just with the subtitles on rather than with actual any sound, because we used to watch in the office when I worked for the cable company. It used to be always on, because apparently the people in our office have no taste. And yeah, this is a film which is, it certainly seems to be, it could be seen as a sort of adventure survival movie, but at the same time it's trying to ask all these sort of bigger questions about faith and destiny and religion, which is sort of the main focus of the first half of the film, where we're introduced to Pi Patel, whose father names him after a swimming pool in France. So his actual name is Piscine Mortal Patel, which of course leads him all sorts of problems in school because people hear piscine, and of course they do that old thing of when you learn French of don't piss in the piscine, so they just keep calling him Pissing Patel, which leads him to changing his name to Pi, and embarking on a rather elaborate scheme to make sure that everyone just associates him with the word pie. This film itself is actually framed around a young writer who meets grown-up Pi Patel as he's living in Canada,
He's in Montreal, where I
classy
live.
Part of Canada.
And yeah, and there was like the scenes that they had of Montreal was literally like places that I go to every day. Very at home for me.
Now I just want to start by bringing up the whole framework for this film, because we can't constantly cut back and forth between this writer and he's interviewing the grown-up Patel, and they're constantly doing things like they're making curry to begin with, and then they're going for a walk, and these leaps in time when we go back to them don't seem to justify how far we're along in the story. So there's some very weird leaps in time on that side. But right from the start, this is a film that sort of has this real sort of fantastical edge to it, and it kind of reminded me of Big Fish in that way, of and the way that Pi describes things in his home, in sort of like his hometown. They got this real sort of tall tale fantastical edge to it, starting with his uncle, who is described as having this inflated chest because he was swung around by his legs as a baby to get the fluid out of his lungs, so it gave him this big broad swimmer's chest. And when we obviously see this character, it's sort of it felt very almost like a CGI creation we're watching, and I did wonder how much CGI was used in this movie, because there's so many shots in the opening where you see this zoo in India where you can you're playing a game of spot the real animal and spot the CGI animal. So
yeah, but you know that the beginning moments like that kind of reminded me a little of Wes Anderson, and I've only seen Grand Budapest Hotel, so I don't have a whole lot to base it on, but
yep.
It kind of reminded me a little of the style, just the color palette and just how the scenes were framed and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is certainly a real sort of love letter to India, something that I've never felt the same sort of appeal of. I know that this time that Hollywood had a real thing for India, as we had this and we had Slumdog Millionaire. And again, India and films set in India just hold no real appeal to myself. If you're still in Hong Kong or Japan or Korea, then yeah, certainly these are all very exciting and interesting locations, but India is certainly not an interesting location for myself. So how did you find these opening sort of scenes that make up this first 40 minutes, where obviously we're introduced to Pi Patel and his sudden interest he develops in religion, so that he eventually ends up taking on about 4 different religions. He becomes a Catholic, Muslim, and with elements of Islam, and even says that he teaches the Torah at the local university, so there's elements of Judaism in there as well. So how did you find this sort of these early years of Pi Patel?
Honestly, I actually could connect to the first part of that a lot, because his feeling towards religion in that sense is something that I think I felt the same way as I grew up. And at this point in my life, I'm not scared to say I'm not very religious. I don't really have any. I believe everything is just about faith and what you believe in, and I respect what everybody believes in. But it's really the fact that I think that at that point it's about I think there's this freedom in his, the first 40 minutes is really about just getting to know this character as a child, as he's growing up, and the family and that he grew up with, and just what sculpts this person into, I guess, what becomes later on the young boy that we see who gets trapped at sea, and then this man now that we're seeing who has this and like whether how much to believe in what he's saying about this story that he says kind of makes you believe in God, right? At this point, it's kind of like he has so many different religions, and I don't think it's a wrong thing, because he's curious about religion in itself, right? And because he's grew up with two different sides. Like, his mother feels like the only connection she has is to religion, to say I think it was I think it was because of something that happened or something that she believes in.
Yeah, she married below her station, so her family disowned her.
Yeah, so the closest thing she can feel to her father was religion. Whereas as a businessman, the father of Pi feels that religion is darkness, as he words it. And because of this, he ends up getting, he ends up being, introduced to all of these Hindu gods, which he calls them superheroes, which already, right away that he has kind of more of like a fantastical mind where he can compare these things to them. And I think it's pretty nice to think about it that way. Like, I've never heard people compare Hindu gods to superheroes. And as he talks about each of them, I thought it was pretty charming how, it was kind of like an easier way to understanding a religion that, I've only had like a 101 course in high school for, But, I mean, other than that, like, I can understand where all of this curiosity is. And I kind of like the character because he was really open-minded to learning about these different religions and really understanding, why God sacrificed, sent Jesus to be hung on a cross and all that stuff, and why would he do that for, like why would you do this for like bad people? Kind of like in his mind it was kind of like, people have sinned, but you're sending someone innocent to do that and all that sort of thing. And then he talks about when he comes to know Allah, and then he starts performing those rituals and all those things. And they they use this as kind of like a way of telling you whether and then obviously the father brings in the fact that, well, you should believe in science, which is being able to think rationally. But it's okay if you believe in a religion that he doesn't believe in. But the whole concept of having this idea of just believing in one thing and not everything. And I think that kind of throws out that question whether it's wrong to believe in everything, I guess.
Well, in terms of the way his worldview is that he sees that by following the three main religions of the era, which is as it's Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, that it's his way of loving God by covering, essentially covering all angles, really. He combines all these elements. So he says grace at the table. I mean, he obviously pays homage to the Hindu gods, which there are over 1 million of, which is a fun fact for you. Mm-hmm. And obviously with Ali, as you said, there's praying to he's obviously shown doing his prayer ceremonies as well, and it's interesting, obviously, because of his parents coming from two different sides. Obviously, his father being the rationalist, and his mother obviously being her feelings grounded in religion. They sort of allow him to pursue this. They see it as they almost view it as a hobby. Whereas his mother says that says to his brother, it's like, you like cricket, Pi likes religion. Which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it. And I mean, the whole portrayal of India here is shown in a very romantic light, because they're obviously in the French Quarter. So there's obviously numerous references drawn to like Paris, and how there's all these different elements that have been brought across by the French settlers. So at the same time, we get like little bits of things such as his relationship with the young girl Anandi, which ultimately, when you look back at it, it just feels like a lot of filler, much like a lot of this 40 minutes. It's all like we're seeing all this theory being thrown around about religion and faith, and it sort of amounts to very sort of little, when the only sort of thing that we need is more his father's teaching about how you don't have a connection to these animals. You're basically just seeing your own compassion reflected back at you, in particular with the tiger, which he forces his son to see devour a goat after he almost loses an arm, thinking that he can hand feed a tiger, which is always an interesting theory, to say the least.
Yeah, but I think that it in some ways, if they say they just jumped into the movie right away, would you kind of like, I thought about it a little, because I actually thought the front was a bit extended. Like, I don't think we needed that whole, like, section about, mocking his name, and that whole section about that whole thing. There is a certain charm to doing that, and I think that it does set a certain foundation for, like, what it's trying to do, because in the end, we are trying to tell the story of, he makes the point that this is a story, that this writer comes is to learn this story that Mamaji told him was about believing in God at the end. So the part about faith and religion and his beliefs felt, like it was relevant, because it also led back to, the modern day and the present time when he's talking about, faith as a house with many rooms. And it's, I think that that's something to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this movie, where, obviously, as the events go by, I feel less about the faith of the whole situation, but more about survival. And then you think about the fact that, some people, how much faith and destiny is in the hands of whatever you believe in order to survive. So, like, how much of that is connected to each other. So I think there is certain value to it. I just think that it might have, it could have done with maybe cutting it a little bit, like keeping it a bit more fast track, but it doesn't seem like it's Ang Lee style, after 8 movies or whatever movies we've seen, it doesn't seem like his style anyway, so it's kind of expected at this point.
It would be nice if we made a movie under 2.5 hours, but yeah, as you said, it's not seemingly on the agenda for Lee as a director. More so, it's when you win, like, the best director Oscar, it essentially gives you more freedom just to do what the hell you want. So people sort of believe more in your vision. So if you say, I want to make a 3-hour movie or 2.5-hour movie, whatever, they're more likely to back your vision than if you don't have that sort of best director win Oscar, where they basically say, no, you're going to trim this down to a reasonable hour and a half. And I feel that with this film, I don't know, maybe if we trimmed about half an hour off it, I probably would have liked it a bit more. But certainly, with as charming as that first 40 minutes is, it does feel a little preachy in places.
At the same time, I feel like, there are certain things that they're really trying to, I don't know if it's to loosen up the mood a little before we go and have to survive in the ocean for 200 something days that we're witnessing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also, we get into that whole thing where, oh, now they need to leave, and then all of a sudden, they're on the boat. And then this really, I feel like it's important to talk about that kind of like, the kind of, argument they have with the cook. But I feel like it's more for the actor they hired to do the cook, more than it's for the situation itself, because it was kind of came out of nowhere, and then it gave this person a place so that, like, later on, back in the, when we talk about the ending, he's able to craft a story around it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some real sort of boutique casting here, as we get Joe Dapadoue playing the ship's cook. And I don't know about yourself, Kim, but I really love Joe Dapadoue. I think he's a fantastic actor.
I do. I have no problem with it, but that's what I'm saying. It's the whole situation is more for an ends to a means, more than it's for the fact that, that part was, is it to show that they're gonna be heading into a lot of, issues with immigration, like as they immigrate to a new country and all the crap that's gonna come with it.
Possibly at the same time,
because it's a very light touch, right? Because, obviously, because they have the whole, Friend Pondicherry area that they essentially live in and, work in and whatnot. They're more, this is an area that's, kind of westernized, but also they're more accepting because it's in another country. So now they're kind of like getting this kind of like culture shock when they're mistreated on the ship.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously they have to leave India because of the changing times, and they decide they're going to move to Canada and they're going to sell the animals from the zoo. So the family are traveling across in this Japanese freighter, and as you said, they encounter this cook who doesn't. I think it's not so much he's a racist. I think he just doesn't take kindly to people messing with his regime, because he's basically got his idea that everyone's going to eat the same thing, and I don't need people coming in my galley and with dietary requirements of like say, I'm vegetarian. So we had that whole scene where he's like, you can just basically just have rice and gravy, and I think they turned down the gravy, so they just have rice, which makes the scene where you've got the Japanese seller who's sort of like, I'm also vegetarian, but I just use gravy as flavor. So, which I thought was it was a nice little subtle scene. So
because I think the scene has its meaning, because I feel like Ang Lee does these movies and every single little detail has its certain meaning to it. And I think in this situation, it could just be the fact that it could be as simple as just your view and my view are different, but you can always change the view and your reality in order to kind of adapt to your situation better. Because in reality, this kind of situation, if you think about it, kind of matches to how we wrap up the ending, when he has to deal with after the whole thing, and they have to deal with those Japanese insurance investigators or something.
Yeah, and that again is where I think with the chef it just plays more into just the end game.
Yeah.
I felt more than anything that you've got to create this character who we can work into our intel, and that it will be what we're going to be told about this character is completely believable, because obviously how we've seen him earlier in the film. So, but as they're obviously traveling across to Canada, the boat sinks, and Pi finds himself on a lifeboat with a zebra, an orangutan, a hyena, and under in the tarpaulin, a Bengal tiger, which is been known called Richard Parker due to a clerical error. So the tiger was given the name of the hunter rather than an actual the name it was supposed to have been given. So yeah, if you hit any talk of Richard Parker, we're talking about the tiger. And I mean, this again is something that amused me greatly when people reading the book, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, he's on this lifeboat, and he's with these animals," and I think they had this real utopian vision that he's just going to go on this like fantastical journey with these animals, and it's all going to work out well. And I'm thinking,
I feel like that's how the movie was promoted, right?
Oh yeah,
the movie was promoted like it was like that. So when the movie turns into this like harsh survival story where he has to face this like harsh turn of events where all of the animals start attacking each other for survival, and the cruel thing that he has to kind of like adapt to the things around him and whatnot, it becomes this very, very harsh story about where Pi needs to grow up very fast in order to adapt to the situation and kind of like find that peace with kind of also be stronger than he is. He has to be stronger in his character to kind of like be able to have that dominance over as much as he can over a fierce tiger.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what animals do. Animals fight all the damn time, despite what certain people will tell you. Along with probably the line, "You can't hug your children with nuclear arms." As I remember one horrible date telling me. She was just sitting there going, "Oh, animals don't fight." And it's like, yes, animals fight all the bloody time.
Have you watched Planet Earth yet? Maybe?
Yes. I've
so
seen
I'm
that.
just saying, like, that's like a conversation you're gonna have.
Oh,
Have you
right.
watched Planet Earth yet? Maybe that would help. This Discovery Channel has a lot of fighting.
I've seen that bloody sloth video more times than I care to mention. But yeah, things go quickly south on the lifeboat, and we obviously end up with Pi having to deal with this tiger, and this in itself is like where the real interesting part of the story is. I mean, it's, as I said, we got the survival tale. It's not just this tale of a guy in a lifeboat, which is, it's got its own interest. It's a guy in a lifeboat with a tiger, which again, something you don't get to really sort of see. And I think it's a really interesting sort of setup. I mean, obviously he's got resources on the lifeboat to stay alive, and he's got rations and bits and pieces, but at the same time he has to work around the fact the tiger is also on the lifeboat with him, creating this really unique situation that he has to sort of overcome. And at the same time he's battling his own moral codes because of his various sort of religions he's following. He has this sort of moral code that he's against killing and eating meat, so he basically has to sort of face against the idea of, where the line between survival and following one's moral codes comes in. So this part of the story, I think, is really sort of great. I mean, it's very stunningly shot as well. I mean, they actually built a huge water tank at a airport, and it's probably one of the largest self-generating wave tanks that's been built of its kind. I mean, it held over 1.7 million gallons of water, and it basically enabled the crew to create any sort of effects that they wanted. They can create night or day, and they can create different sort of settings and clouds and nightfall and storms, and it just made it a lot easier than trying to shoot on the real ocean, which I'm sure like the production team of Waterworld will tell you. So to look at it, I mean, you wouldn't think that it's so much it's a water tank. A lot of the shots do look really, really realistic, and certainly it gives the a lot more sort of freedom. I mean, the fact that the camera can pretty much go anywhere around the raft. It can go underwater. We can see what's swimming around. We can have all these sort of elaborate sort of shots and have a lot more sort of control than, as I said, if he was out trying to shoot this for real.
I think that, shooting it in a water tank has its perks, obviously. They were able to do a whole lot with that. And I'm sure, it was, it probably wasn't easy either. But I mean, like, my deal with this is that, like, it also has that possibility of giving it even more of that fantastical element, especially as, move through those ocean days and things start getting a bit fuzzy between what's real. And the fact that is that the water is incredibly still. Like, incredibly still. So it's very, like, for a lot of, like, there's a good part of the middle section where, he's just going through the days, and the water is so still. And it started making me feel like whether he was dreaming this up. So, and that's when obviously, you start seeing these, like, kind of these effects happen, right? Like, all these different things are happening, and then the water is underwater. There's all these things going on, and there's the reflection of the sky and all that stuff. And the scenes are so pretty. And then I started thinking about whether, it was just, I think that was, maybe it was probably all deliberate, I think, to, where there's where there's more waves and where it's supposed to be calm to, show off a certain scene that they want to show. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's done pretty nice.
Definitely so, and it's certainly the film constantly finds new challenges to keep things interesting. It never feels boring when you're on the ocean segments. There's always some new challenge. There's always some obstacle to overcome. I mean, even when you get these moments of calm, all it takes is just a huge phosphorescent humpback whale to come and screw everything up for yourself. And it's I think it just seeing the problem solving, much like when you watch The Martian. It's just this idea of problem solving in a unique environment that just is really interesting to watch. And certainly it's not a situation that you sort of really encountered before. I mean, obviously you've seen people doing the lifeboat sort of survival thing before, but certainly to do it with a wild animal is certainly a unique thing. And the connection that he has with this tiger is also a really interesting fact, because they become very bonded, despite his father obviously telling him this is a creature that works on a very primal level. It has no compassion or feeling. These are just your sort of emotions that you're putting on the animal. And yet these two, over the course of this journey, they form this unique bond. So even to the point that when he thinks he's found a sort of sanctuary, he finds like an island in the middle of the ocean, that when he comes to leave the island, he insists on taking the tiger with him. He doesn't just dump the tiger on the island, which would be a more logical step, I would have said, but if for some reason he feels there's such a connection to this tiger that he actually takes it with him when he sets off again.
But I mean, it's the same idea that, when you're by yourself and you've spent 2/3 of the year at sea with this one companion, you've already grown together, right? I mean, he had a chance where he could have just left Richard Parker to die in the ocean, and he chose to let him back on board and himself go onto his little raft, and try and survive together. And I think because of that, it's kind of like that feeling that you have, even like it's just like how can, in Castaway, how does Tom Hanks' character bond with a volleyball, right? And he does, because it's the only companion you have. And in the same situation, as dangerous as Richard Parker is, I think that the companionship and is like, I think in the end he says it really well, like that Richard Parker is the reason that he's able to survive this, because it became kind of like his goal was to take care of this tiger, to make sure that he was fed, to make sure that he was doing okay, and kind of like finding a place. So when they were hit with that second storm at sea, and he realizes that Richard Parker is actually scared of lightning and all that. There's this moment where there's this very strong creature that he thinks he can't overcome, and he's kind of like bullying, has this kind of weakness. And when he comes out of that, Richard Parker looks like he's about to die, right? And then at that time, he kind of feels like, what? He has that chat with God about, you know what? I'm happy for the life you've given me, but I'm ready to go, kind of thing. And that's all connected to, and that's kind of like this bond that they have together. And I think that it's so special that the way that it's shown, it's very touching to see.
I suppose it's good to him to have someone to talk to. I mean, obviously, as you said in Castaway, Tom Hanks he's got the volleyball Wilson to talk to. It could be argued whether Wilson's a better travelling companion or Richard Perkins is. I mean, which do you prefer to hang out with? I mean, this tiger, or do you essentially talk into a volleyball? So
me would definitely be a tiger. No,
okay.
No questions asked. I might die in the process. I'm not as smart as Pi is in the whole survival level.
Yeah,
but I mean, the guy's got the boy's gone through a lot of bad stuff, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, I mean, Langley wasn't actually the first choice to direct the film. Originally, the film was going to go to M. Night Shyamalan, who I love this quote, that he chose not to direct it because the book is the kind of twist ending, and I was concerned that as soon as you put my name on it, everybody would have a different experience. So he's there taking credit for a twist ending that was already in the book. So that again just says wonders about him and his awful personality. Next up was Alfonso Cuarón, who decided to go off and direct Children of Men instead. A film I have really mixed thoughts on. I know there's people out there who really love that film, but I don't know, it just never really connected with myself. I don't know about yourself, Kim.
I don't know. I like Children of Men. It was the first movie that I really I think I saw Cuarón, and then I started, watching, Gravity and stuff. And then I really appreciate, the things he's done, like the vision he has for storytelling and, visuals and stuff like that. But I feel like I'm missing a lot of his filmography, so I don't know. I might be just basing it on two things. But I mean, Children of Men is good. It is a really tough movie to watch, so it's not one that I think I haven't watched it in maybe 5-6 years at this point.
Yeah. The next director to be offered it was Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who I think would have done phenomenal work with it. I mean, obviously he's a director who gave us the likes of City Lost Children, Amélie, Delicatessen, very sort of visual director. Even with like more mainstream work like Alien Resurrection, he still always maintained his very visual sort of style, and certainly has for a film which it uses so much sort of like dreamlike quality and relies so heavily on visuals. I think he would have done a really fantastic job. But unfortunately he left, leading the way for Ang Lee to take over the project, and also boosting the budget up to 120 million. But considering the film ended up taking 609 million, I think it's sort of the gamble on Lee's sort of vision that sort of paid off for them ultimately. So
yeah, I mean, but at the same time, if you think about it, at this point, Ang Lee does have, the whole, he has already a Best Director award under his belt, and it's not like he's done, horrible movies at this point. So, so it's not exactly like people aren't running to these movies to go see it. Anybody where it's kind of like an award-winning director goes and makes a movie, the chances of, the audience wanting to go watch it is already a lot higher. And then, when it's an adaptation, it also boosts the chances because you got a whole bunch of people who have read this book who wants to see how the book is, even though, they're expecting to hate it. That sort of thing. And I think that the movie was that they took on Ang Lee. It was mostly for the fact that I think that, I was reading somewhere that Life of Pi is one of those books where no one believes it's going to be can be adapted. And then he ends up making, this movie, which obviously brings in so much money, and it's somewhat of a surprise.
I mean, they say that, but the book's format is so straightforward. I mean, he doesn't really change the format of the book, because the book's broken down into essentially the same moves we see here. We obviously got the first half, which is in India. Then we got the boat section, and then we end up with the alternate story. So it's hardly the most unfilmable book. I mean, we're not talking Watchmen here, which is a incredibly complex story. We're taking on multiple formats and styles to tell a very sort of complex and involved story in terms of world building. Because I mean, when you look at Watchmen, it's not just a comic book story. You've also got huge segments of written sort of biographies that have been worked in there. You've got like the Tales of the Black Freighter, which sort of is all adds to the world building that is happening in there. And I think Watchmen is certainly a much more complex project than trying to adapt Life as Pi. I mean, even something like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas I can see being much more of a challenge than this book was, but
I think it's just the fact that any book where it's more about kind of like that more complex hidden kind of like belief and faith and all that stuff, it's hard to film into a movie where people will grasp those things the same meaning from. And I think after watching this movie, the only thing I feel is that I want to kind of read the book, because I feel like that might be able to portray what it's trying to say a little bit better. Because in the end, I mean, I don't think watching this made me think about, is it about faith and destiny and whatnot. It's more about, for me, it was more about the whole survival element of it. And, the bond that Richard Parker and Pi ends up having. And I think the more complex feeling is more, in the end, about just, which version do you want to believe? I think it's, what you believe in is really based on, whether you're kind of like a more rational mind, like the insurance investigators who need a believable story, like something that's more grounded, or one that, can you believe that a boy survived with a tiger for, 270 days or something like that? The whole concept of him in this whole process being able to save a tiger and living with a zebra and orangutan and a hyena, and then, he's floating on a raft in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and, all these stories, and then going onto this island that no one has ever seen before, who is carnivorous, there's so many fantastical elements, and to us it's fantasy, but maybe in reality this happened, and it's all about at the ending where which version do you want to believe? Like what, and that is more my takeaway is, you know, do you believe in the reality or the possibility of something that doesn't feel real to be a reality?
Did you see this film in 3D at all, or are you watching it in standard bog definition like myself, being cheap?
I rented it, so there was no 3D.
No.
But you could really feel like some of the scenes are really meant to be 3D. And in 3D, it would have been a pretty good feeling. Like, visually, it would be kind of like a real good ride. But obviously, you know, there were some scenes that I felt wouldn't have made a difference. Like, I think 70% of the movie... 70 or 80% of the movie didn't really necessarily need to be in 3D, and it would have been fine. There were just like certain scenes where there were action, or like the storm scenes or whatever, you know, that it felt a little bit more, you know, obviously, you know, maybe the humpback whale jumping into your face might be very exciting. I don't know.
I was just curious to obviously, I mean, for myself, I wouldn't really fork out to see this in 3D. There's nothing really sort of looking at this that made me think, oh, wow, I've got to really see this in 3D, despite the fact the film was advertised as the next Avatar.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, I feel that way about a lot of 3D movies, and that's why now, like, I don't see most movies in 3D unless they're really meant to be in 3D.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like especially in those, you know, 2012, like when 3D was just coming into play and whatnot, that a lot of movies, like 85% of the movie was not, you know, obligatory to watch in 3D. And then there were just those moments where when you watch it in 2D, you know those moments were meant to be in 3D because they're like meant to kind of give you a shock or something. Or like, you know, kind of like this, you know, in your face moment. And it means nothing to me, honestly. I think that 3D sometimes watching it when there's a lot going on is kind of bothersome. So I don't know if it would really have enhanced the feeling of, you know, this kind of movie, because there were only a few very like exciting scenes, I guess. But, you know, Ang Lee's movies are not about excitement, so they're fairly calm in general.
Well, in terms of the effects, I mean, the film was subject to a lot of controversy in regards to its special effects. Despite the fact the film won Best Visual Effects at the 2013 Academy Awards, the Riven and Hughes Studios, who provide most of the effects for the film, were forced to file for bankruptcy, citing unfair competition from unsubsidized and tax-exempt foreign studios. This in turn sparks a demonstration of nearly 500 VFX artists who were protesting outside the Academy Awards, and in particular the protest leader targeted Ang Lee, who during his thank you speech managed to essentially thank everyone but the actual production team who had handled all the special effects. He's quoted as saying, "Ang thanked the crew, the actors, his agent, his lawyer, and the entire population of Taiwan, right down to the team that built the wave pool and the soundstage where Pi was shot, but failed to mention hundreds of artists who not only made the main character the tiger, but replaced that pool, making it look like the real ocean for 80% of his movie." So it raised a lot of ire there. At the same time, the Oscar-nominated song Pi's Lullaby received much criticism, as it was alleged that it was basically a reworking of Renowned Lullaby, and that the composer basically denied this, and it's gone back and forth still. Even now they haven't really got to the end of it. On top of that, there's also animal abuse allegations, with rumours that they almost killed the tiger coming from the set. This also not being helped by the ACA monitor, so the American Humane Association. Gina Johnson, she was involved with one of the producers of the films, which is been rumoured to have helped to influence and get the film its No Animals Were Harmed certification. So there was a lot of controversy in regards to the animal abuse. There was also footage released of one of the animal trainers, Michael Hackenberg, who was seen swearing and whipping one of the young tigers 19 times. And yeah, I've watching the film, I didn't realize it was actual live tigers being used. I thought it was all CGI, so it was really kind of shocking to know that they were doing work with live tigers, especially during the boat sequences. And where they're talking about, obviously, where the tiger almost dying, there's a scene where the tiger does look to be drowning, and I thought this was all CGI tiger. Were you aware there was any real tiger footage?
I mean, I was thinking to myself, I was thinking like this was CGI, and then I was looking at the tiger and I was like, this looks so real. I don't know if this is CGI. I didn't research it or anything, but I didn't feel like it was CGI. Like, it felt very real. I just didn't know if anybody would risk having a tiger on scene. So
I can't imagine it would be the easiest sort of set to work with a tiger on. I mean,
dogs are hard enough to work with. Imagine tigers who are kind of life-threatening, you know?
Well, I mean, just look at let's just break it down even further. I mean, like, if you try to work with your cat in any sort of film thing, and you essentially just basically increase the size by 6, and you have essentially the difficulty of working with a tiger, so...
Pretty much, right?
Lazy sod just sits there eating all day.
My cat only shows up into things that when I used to do videos, she would only show up when I didn't want her in a scene, and then she'd butt herself in exactly where I didn't need her to be. So that's cooperation, right?
Indeed. Obviously, the final part of this film, we obviously is sort of brought into question this whole sort of tale that's been spun here, and we, as you mentioned already, I mean, the fact that for the insurance investigations they need a much more grounded tale, and the key piece of evidence, and this is what made me laugh the most, is the fact that one of them says that bananas don't float, so that the orangutan that we see floating to the raft on a bag of bananas could possibly have happened when actually bananas do float, especially in that density of water. So that's what your misunderstanding of how science works is what you're questioning a whole story on.
But I think that's just the fact that, it's how these people have their own beliefs, and they just need a story that just kind of like explains how this happened. But in the end, they didn't really get a story that explains why the freighter sunk.
No.
So it was all kind of like, they asked him, and then they didn't believe his story, and then they asked him to do one that they believed in, which he did. And then in the end, it still had nothing to do with why the freighter sunk, because he wouldn't know. Why would he know? He's a boy who lived in the lower compartments, who came up during a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
And had no idea what was going on until he realized when he went back that the bottom was, like, that the ship was sinking, right?
And it's kind of frustrating, really, because the amount of people that really sort of, like, proclaim this as, like, such an amazing dark twist of an ending. And it's like, when they talk about The Mist, and it's like, well, The Mist didn't really deserve that dark ending either. So... It's a little frustrating when you have these films which have got these twist endings that they don't particularly need nor deserve, and this is certainly a case here. It's sort of like, oh, we're gonna throw some doubt on it, and I think it's certainly with the way the film starts. Pi is introduced, and he seems like this teller of tall tales. And certainly the writer at the start, he constantly questions like information that's been told to him from like other sources, and what Pi compares it against what Pi's telling him. So right from the start, there's obviously this doubt that's being cast over can we trust anything that Pi tells us? So at least it bothers to sort of to lay some groundwork for its twist, so to speak.
I think it's just Oscar movies are always like this, where movies who want to have a lot of depth is usually very Oscar fodder, and Life of Pi fits in there because of the fact that we have this twist where you can really question, because in the end he never really gives you a clear answer what's the true version of the story, because obviously the version that he tells the insurance investigators could be the true version, but Pi does live in kind of like a fantasy world where he lives in all this belief in all these different religions, and he's kind of like this very like quirky and unbelievable sort of character. So you kind of have this feeling where maybe, you know, he is creating a situation where he's making like a less harsh version of the human, you know, the brutal human reality that he would have had if all the characters that he was doing a parallel to were humans that were on the freighter. So, you know, it's not believable. I mean, he does these parallels, and it's very obvious that we see these parallels, and I'm just surprised that, you know, these investigators believed it, you know, because I'm sure they're not, well, they did throw off a story for bananas not floating, but I mean, but, you know, I would assume they would see that parallel, right? So I mean, either way, I don't know. I mean, I think that the ending was made on purpose to give it depth, to give it that you know, ending thought for you to kind of ponder a little on, you know, what version do you want to believe, right?
Further viewing then, if you do like Life is Pi, you want to watch something similar, what would you recommend people watching?
I mean, obviously I mentioned Castaway, which is very much the same type of movie, and that kind of like odd bond that they have. I would say, I thought a lot about mostly survival movies. Obviously, you know, 127 Hours is a really good one, which is also kind of brutal. You have, you know, one that we reviewed in the last Shark Week that we did, The Shallows, which is really a survival story, also set, you know, in water and that sort of stuff. I actually thought The Perfect Storm would be pretty good. You know, I thought the movie's pretty good, and I thought it's nice to talk about something like that too, because it's kind of, you know, it's a group of people trying to survive through, you know, this crazy situation. And while we were talking about it, I actually thought of another movie that would kind of be something similar to Life of Pi, and that is a movie that is also adapted from a book, and that's Eat, Pray, Love. I don't think the movie's great, but I mean, the idea is there.
Really?
The idea of like this whole, you know, life thing where you're kind of like going to see this world and you know, these different things that, you know, obviously is a different kind of path, but it's also one that's about kind of digging a little deeper.
Okay.
And that's it for me.
I can't stand these books where these writers, they go and backpack over to India or Tibet or something, and they come back feeling all worldly, and then write books like Eat, Pray, Love and Life is Pi, and try and bring across this sense of deeper spirituality.
I mean, in all honesty, when you're trying to do a double feature, don't you think Life of Pi goes well with Eat, Pray, Love? You know, if you're into one, would you not watch the other one, right?
No. I mean, I would rather watch Castaway with this, or something like The Martian, or... The
Martian's a good one. I actually was thinking about it, and I just couldn't figure out what it was, and then I figured you were going to talk about it since you talked about it. So I was like...
Yeah, it's that idea. It's just, you know, problem solving in a unique location. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's an okay movie. I guess it's certainly a film that thinks it feels highly of itself, and certainly the Academy felt the same way as well. To give Ang Lee the best director for it, but at the same time, I feel that he's done a stronger work. Certainly, with Crash the Tiger Dragon would be my one go-to if we're trying to think of when we look at those Oscar-winning sort of efforts. Then I would certainly put that as higher. Even perhaps Brokeback Mountain, as slow-moving as that was, I think would certainly be higher rated than this was. So. Obviously, we're at the end of another season, and as we like to do, we like to obviously look back at the season's was, and time now to highlight some choices. So, I mean, Kim, of the ones that we've seen, what would you say has been your favourite selection of the season?
How about you say it first?
I knew you were going to say that. For myself, Wedding Banquet. I think Wedding Banquet is just a phenomenal film. Yes, I mean, I could obviously said Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but I feel that's kind of the obvious answer here. And Wedding Banquet is the middle part of the Father Knows Best trilogy. It's such an interesting and fun little tale. It's kind of like a screwball comedy, and at the same time has got real sort of taps into those sort of familiar themes of Lee's work, or the idea of duty and family. So, and just the idea of this guy trying to get his family off his back by throwing a fake wedding, and just how the different characters all sort of come together, and just the ending in particular. As we said when we recorded it, it was a film I rented and I watched about 3 times over the one weekend. I enjoyed it that much, so it's definitely was the highlight for myself. But what about yourself, Kim?
My best, I think, after a lot of thought, would definitely go to Lust Caution. I sound like I'm still questioning myself.
Okay.
Okay, no. It would go to Lust Caution. I think that, Lust Caution might not be the movie that I'd go back to watch a lot because it is kind of heavy and it has a lot of really, intense sex scenes that I might not want to rewatch too much. But Lust Caution is kind of I feel like it's kind of like that step in Ang Lee's career, which kind of breaks away from other things that he's done. There's a bit more of a dangerous element here. A lot more, it is slow, but there is a pretty good pacing for, the 2 hours. I think it was one of those movies where I literally sat through it in kind of one sitting and I was really, captured by everything that was going on and just, all the characters and all the development and the script was done well and the scenes were done well and that sort of thing. And it's such a strong piece of cinema that it's just so captivating that I think it's one of the works that stand out the most to me.
I mean, it's funny you should obviously mention Lost Caution because that's my hidden gem of this season. When we watched it, I think I was in my various sort of film groups like German's Guide to Midnight Cinema and over at the Asian Cinema Film Club, and just saying, you have to see this film. Why are we not talking about this film? Because it feels that it came out and had a lot of buzz at the time, and now it seems to have been kind of forgotten, which is a real shame because it is a phenomenal piece of filmmaking. I mean, it's 2.5 hours, but it absolutely flies by. And it's a very sumptuously shot film. Everything looks really stunning. And it's frankly just not a lot of style over substance. There's a real depth and there's a real thriller element to this. This idea of the students setting out to try and create this patriotic act and then ultimately reuniting certain key characters to re-invoke this plot, this time with more of a honey trap plot, only for the trap to be turned on the honey trapper. It's just a phenomenal story, and it just keeps you engrossed right into the end. So for myself, it's a real hidden gem of this filmography, and the sort of film I would love to see Ang Lee making more, but just generally just making more Asian cinema, because it seems to be certainly when he's working at his strongest compared to his films that he's making within the Hollywood system, certainly.
But I feel like maybe he has kind of this daring voice in cinema and having these stories that he wants to tell that seem to really is very ahead of time of the Asian market, at least when he releases those movies. That maybe he's a bit more reluctant to do it now because, obviously with all the things that's happened, he there's a lot of, I think that some of his movies are probably banned in China. And then you have Lust Caution where, the actress had had a probation on her career because of this, and all kinds of things like that happen. Then maybe it's less, something he wants to take too much steps into because the world is more accepting in the Western world when he's trying to tell a story than in the Eastern world, right? But I mean, since you talked about your hidden gem, I'm gonna go ahead and because I kind of flipped my mentality than yours.
Okay.
I actually think Father Knows Best trilogy is more of a hidden gem because it's so early in his career that people probably don't go and find his movies as much. But I'm not going with the wedding banquet, as you probably guessed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which I think is his hidden gem, because I think that, that movie is just so nice to watch in that complex family drama. And it's something that Ang Lee does so well of as well, because he's so, I think that when he first starts his career, a lot of it is, especially with the Father Knows Best trilogy, it's all about bringing up this this Chinese culture, and and in this one we talk mostly about food, and the food in this family, and how dinner brings the family together, and all of these things are very strongly rooted in kind of like the Chinese beliefs, and then you see the family kind of each having their own connections as they grow up, and in romance, and in their futures, and all those things. And obviously you can't ignore the fact that there is some really, really good just food pornography going on here.
It's a different sort of filth, isn't it, really? You get to see erotica in Lust, Caution, and then you get to see food porn and Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. That opening sequence, I mean, alone is just worth watching the film for. Just seeing, it's like it's very much sort of like, oh, you think you know food? No, you don't know nothing. And it's just like watching a guide to school you.
And the movie is about so much more than that. It's about growing up, your children growing up, and the older generation being somewhat like left behind, and that whole gap of how much someone wants to take care of their father, and that whole concept, which is very grounded in Chinese families, which is something that I think is very important to talk about, and this movie does it so well. I mean, Father Knows Best in general, I think mostly its latter two is done really well in showing that sort of thing. Just how all the Chinese culture and all that. I mean, if I could, the hidden gem would be all three, I think. But right now we're choosing one, so Eat, Drink, Man, Woman is my hidden gem. And so now we're at our worst. What's your worst?
Is it really a contest when it comes to this? I mean, certainly one of my biggest disappointments of this season was the Ice Storm. When we entered into it, the Ice Storm was a film I was really looking forward to seeing, as it's been on my watch list for quite a while, and it was kind of disappointing when we watched it, and more so because Norman really loved that movie over at Flick Hunter, and it was kind of sad. It's sort of like to say to him, it's like, this movie that you've watched over and over again, I don't really like it as much as you do. Which is always a little awkward.
Yeah, well, we can't always have the same opinions about things, right?
No.
But, I mean, I get where you're coming from. And sometimes, being disappointed about a movie is worse than it being a bad movie.
Yeah, and I mean, if it hadn't been for my actual pick for, worst movie, I think then it would be the one that claimed this category. And I mean, that's kind of saying something, because we obviously had Sensibility in there, and we obviously had Pushing Hands, which perhaps was a little slower than the other two films in the Foreigner's Best trilogy, and certainly we also got our film selection tonight, Life is Pi, which could also be a contender. But the one to burn is Hulk, or aka How to Make the Most Boring Superhero Movie Ever. Yeah, this is 2+ hours of family drama tedium, which, if you go looking for a fun film on your Friday night, I don't think this is going to be it.
So let me get it straight. Is your worst movie Hulk?
Yes.
Or... Okay,
my worst movie is going to be Hulk. It's the lowest rated of this season, with a woeful 2 stars. It's... Here Ang Lee's obviously trying to encapsulate his themes of family drama into a superhero movie, and yes, I understand that at the same time this is a film which is very early in the superhero cycle, so we hadn't learned how to make $1 million blockbusters out of superhero properties at this point, but this is just so tedious. The fact that Hulk doesn't show up for the first hour, and the fact we got Eric Bana playing Bruce Banner, where he just, as I said on that episode, he just constantly seems to be trying to play the Hulk without turning into the Hulk in so many scenes in that movie.
But, I mean, we talked about it already in there, and it's Eric Bana is a very intense actor as he is, that he doesn't really need to turn into the Hulk to be the Hulk.
Yeah.
But either way, I mean, I'm totally along with you. We rarely have choices that match up, but the worst for me is Hulk. I actually think the Hulk was such a surefire win. Like, there were no other contenders for me. Because, you know, as much as, you know, the other movies were slow and whatnot, everything had, like, moments where I kind of appreciated the movie for what it was. Like, even in the ice storm, and even in, you know, Life of Pi and whatnot. I mean, all these movies, as slow as they were, I still found points about them that I think, you know, whether it was cinematography or whether it was just, you know, certain characters that were created and whatnot. But Hulk is kind of, like, forgettable. You know, we were talking about it, you know, off the show, off recording, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, off air. And I was just like, and I was telling you, I honestly don't remember a lot about it. I only remember, like, one ending scene and one middle scene when he changes. And then I can't remember much from there. So, it's not only a bad movie, but it's kind of like a forgettable movie, which I think is even worse. Because in the sea of superhero movies, you shouldn't be forgettable. So, I don't know. I mean, that's where I'm at with you know, my worst movie choice.
I know, and I mean, the Hulk is a very difficult character to do. I mean, removing, obviously, the legendary TV series aside with, you know, Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk. That man needed no CGI. Just a tin of green paint for that man to Hulk out. And, yeah, I mean, that's obviously something its own. And then when we look at the ones which followed, I think, as we said on that show, I think only the Edward Norton version has been the truest to the Hulk vision. We've had a rather intense Eric Bana here, which was just combined with Nick Nolte's almost psychotic father since the father-like performance. And then we've obviously followed it more recently with Mark Ruffalo's dull as dishwater interpretation of the Hulk, which, you know, because Ruffalo's more willing to play by the Disney rules, has meant that he's obviously stayed longer and got to keep cashing those checks, while Norton was obviously pushed to the side when the agenda changed, which was always still one of the grave areas of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But, you know, the Hulk is just it just fails on just so many levels of entertainment generally.
Yeah, you know, a pity, because, you know, that was Ang Lee's, you know, big thing to kind of get into the whole superhero train and that big blockbuster train, right?
Yeah.
And it's only, you know, now that, you know, with Gemini Man that he's gotten back into blockbusters, right? So, you know, maybe he's just not meant for it. He's more just meant for, like, the art house kind of thing. Never know, right?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, while this season's been very different than the previous seasons that we've done, I don't feel, you know, that it's been ultimately time wasted. It's certainly been a season which has highlighted films that perhaps would have not got around to seeing. I mean, seeing things like Lost Caution, for example, or Getting to Cross the Ice Storm off, or even look at the Father's Knows Best trilogy. These are all worthwhile uses of time that we've had with the season. So, while perhaps it's been a very different season to the previous ones that we had with Paul W.S. Anderson, Guillermo del Toro, and Sofia Coppola. This has certainly had its moments of films that I'm glad that made me glad that we obviously chose to do Ang Lee, even though it's been, as I say, it's been just a very sort of different season to put together.
And I mean, I mentioned it before, especially when, you know, I was talking about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Brokeback Mountain, that, you know, Ang Lee is one of those directors that is worth revisiting because his movies are so sophisticated that they're for kind of like the older audience. So as you get a bit older, you know, you know a little bit more, you have a little bit more knowledge about life and whatnot. You understand his movies and, you know, the messages he's trying to tell and the connections he's trying to draw with these characters a lot more than, say, when you're watching it, you know, when they release, when you were younger. At least for me, I mean, most of the movies we were watching that has been released, I was like, you know, in high school or something, or high school or CEGEP or something like that. So especially for, I think one of the best things of the season was changing my view from, not liking Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon to, now I actually, I actually appreciate the movie a lot.
Great. So yeah, that brings us to the end of another season of Movies and Tea. We thank you as always for listening, and if you haven't done already, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe leave us a review, as it all helps raise the profile of the show. You can also check out our full archives of not only this season but all previous 4 seasons over on moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com. You can follow us on Facebook, and we are on Twitter as well as Instagram, so you can also keep up with things there. But Kim, what do we have coming up next?
We're heading into our After Hours. So After Hours is always kicked off with our Shark Week, which is our 4th Shark Week?
Yep,
Third
Shark Week 4th.
Yeah, 4th Shark Week. Yeah. And we're gonna be looking at 2012's Bait.
So yeah, an Australian production as a group of supermarket shoppers find themselves submerged underwater when a freak tsunami hits the store, not only submerging them in water, but also ushering in a group of great white sharks. So it's going to be a real interesting one to discuss, because Bait's it came out and kind of sunk without a trace, and I think a lot of people, it was in that sort of swell of bad CGI shark movies. So it's going to be interesting to revisit that and see whether we got ourselves a hidden gem or whether it deserved to obviously be sunk. So that's all coming up on our next episode. But thank you as well for listening, and thank you to my co-host Kim. And we'll be back next time to talk about Bait. Good night.